Hey, in this video we'll be talking about classes, but only in a very limited way. Classes are much more powerful than we're going to see in this video, but I want to present them simply as data containers right now. So if you look at what I have in Visual Studio, it is just the Hello World program, and you should recognize that we've been using a class all along, Hello World, and it's been a container for our program. Our program has a single function called main, and that's it, really. The main has some commands for the computer to perform, and that's all it does. But we can use other classes, multiple classes, to act as containers for our data. You see that since Hello World has a function in it, other classes can too. So we'll see how much more useful classes can be. But for now, I'm going to write a new class in this same file. So I'm just going to put it up here. Class, let's call it game data. And then it needs curly braces after it. That's the body of the class. And everything that goes inside it is contained by it. So we can put variables in our class, and I'm just going to put a very simple kind of data. First, I'm going to start off with public int, and let's say num enemies. So I've typed public here because classes can hide some of their data, data that happens to be internal to the class, kind of like you might be interested in the face of the watch and where the hands are pointing, but a watch has a lot of mechanisms that are internal that you shouldn't really care about, that you should hide, should be hidden from you. So we have public int num enemies, and if you left off public, it would be private by default, and so we wouldn't be able to access this data. So that's enough for just containing some data. We could put a bunch more variables if we wanted to, but I'm going to add a few lines in here in my main function, and I'm going to create a new game data object. So declaring a game data object is just like any other variable. You start with the type, and the class definition above has created a new type for us. So game data is a new type of variable we can use, and I'm going to call this just data. And then we can assign a value to that variable. This variable can really only contain game data, so I'm going to say equals new game data. So this is special. New is a keyword that it's actually a kind of operator that allocates new memory. So we have to make space for a game data object to live, and we'll talk about memory in the future. But this creates a new game data object, and the parentheses after it indicate that some sort of function is being called, and we'll get into constructors later. But the constructor is what initializes the data. So right now, I don't have a constructor. I am just using the default constructor that's created for you. So it doesn't really do anything. So after this, I've created my game data object, which contains num enemies. And so I can access it just like we've been accessing some of these other objects, like console dot. I'll do data dot num enemies, and since it's a public variable, I can mess around with it. I can assign a value to it. So let's say like 16 enemies, and then we'll say console.writeLine, and we'll say something about our game here. There are, and I'll leave a space. And I'm going to use the plus operator to concatenate, to put strings together, so that I can do this all in one command. Data.numEnemies, is going to access the NumEnemies variable in the data, or in the game data class. And so I've got there are, and then put next to that is going to be the value of NumEnemies. It's going to be 16. And then I can concatenate again another string on the end, enemies left. So this should print out there are 16 enemies left. Alright, so sometimes you'll create classes in the same file as other classes, and that's cool, especially if they're closely related or if they're helper classes in some way. But you can also create separate files to store other classes in. So I'm going to do that for another class. In my Solution Explorer, I'm going to right-click on my project, and I'm going to add new item. And so they give you a bunch of options. If you're in Visual C# items, there are way too many options. I'm going to go to Code, or you can look for it in here. Code, and there's Code File. I could do Class, but that also gives you some extra stuff that you might not want. Code File is just going to give me an empty file. So I'll give it a name. Let me call it enemy, and I'll add it to my project. So it switched me over to that new file, enemy.cs. And here I can write my normal stuff using system, because I probably will use it. And then class, I'm going to create the enemy class. So this is just going to be a container, like the game data container. I'm going to do public int, let's say hit points, and public int damage. So just some information to describe what my enemy can do. And this is not really going to be a game, even though it has some parts that sound like one. We can pretend. So I'm going to create an enemy, my enemy, using the new operator, new enemy. And so now we have an instance of the enemy class. This is an object called myEnemy, and it is storing two pieces of information, the hit points and the damage. So I should initialize those, and since I haven't written a constructor, I'll just do it here. myEnemy.hitPoints. Give it some value. myEnemy.damage, and then I can do stuff with it. Console.writeLine. The enemy has some hit points. myEnemy.hitPoints. Hit points left. Alright. So we should be seeing hello world first, then we create a game data object, we initialize it, and then it says there are 16 enemies left. We create an enemy, we initialize some values, and then it prints out the enemy has 100 hit points left. So that's what we should see. Now the nice thing in C# that you don't have to worry about, but you do in some other languages, is that I'm accessing that other file without any qualification. So I'm just saying enemy, my enemy. And the compiler, as it brings together the files that are in this project, connects these different modules. We have a program module and we have an enemy module. And so the code can reference code from other files. Alright, so let's run it, make sure we have what we expect. Alright, hello world, 16 enemies left, 100 hit points. Great. Alright, that's it. Just talking about classes as data containers, containers for variables. But we'll see what else they can do very soon. See ya.